Hi, everyone. I'm Nicolle Wallace. It's 4 o'clock right here in New York, where right now you are watching on the other side of your screen a motorcade escort of the indicted, twice impeached, disgraced ex-president Donald Trump. He is en route from his airplane, which landed at LaGuardia, to Manhattan, to his apartment in Trump Tower. He will reportedly stay the night there ahead of his history-making arraignment in the alleged hush money scheme. Tomorrow, there are a lot of open questions, a lot of vital considerations being made, even at this late hour. First, security. As you might well imagine, the NYPD is well aware of the possibility, the potential for violence tomorrow somewhere, as Trump has previously called on his supporters to protest. In a statement to NBC News, the NYPD reveals this, quote, "Officers have been placed on alert and the department remains ready to respond as needed." They add this, quote, "There are no current credible threats to New York City." Ahead of the big day tomorrow, we're on the lookout for any specifics related to the actual charges that Trump now faces. Sources telling NBC News he faces about 30 criminal charges, very likely related to payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels back in 2016. It's something Trump has previously denied. As of this moment, the actual indictment remains under seal. But we should tell you, because this is one of those things that could change over the next 2 hours, NBC News this weekend joined a coalition of other news organizations in making two requests in the interests of transparency and the public interest. The first, that the indictment be immediately unsealed. The second, that cameras be allowed to watch Donald Trump's arraignment live as it happens. This afternoon, in a letter to the judge, Trump's lawyers insisted that cameras not be allowed inside the courtroom. So whether or not we get to watch this historic moment in court is just one of a number of open questions at this hour about how tomorrow will go. It is all fluid. We expect Trump to be processed at the courthouse. We expect, it's been reported, that he will be fingerprinted and then he will hear the charges. We do not expect Trump at any point to be handcuffed or put in a holding cell. DNA will likely not be collected. And whether or not a mugshot is taken is still one of those unknown and unclear issues. We do know that Trump will leave court under his own free will and that he plans to travel back to Florida before speaking out very publicly about the case against him tomorrow night. The eve of an unprecedented moment in American history is where we begin today. Former U.S. Attorney, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman joins us. Also joining us, former RNC Chairman Michael Steele, plus former Senator Claire McCaskill is back. And with me at the table for the hour, Basil Smikle. He's a Democratic strategist and director of the Public Policy Program at Hunter College. I start with you, Michael Steele. I guess some of us could argue it was always going to end like this in early 2015 when we urged Republicans not to take this path. But here we are.
Here we are. Yes, a lot of us warned, and waved our arms and flailed about trying to say that this is not only bad branding for the GOP, but it is bad politics for the country. And we've watched over the last 7 years the complete and utter disintegration of a once great party. And this is the GOP right here on your screen. The head of the party on his way to be processed as a criminal defendant, and the party leadership silent. And when they do speak, it's just to reinforce their fealty to the man. If I just can take a moment, I'm really annoyed that we're actually watching this unfold this way, because Donald Trump is in his car loving every minute of it. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about him. It's still all about him. He's going to go back after this process tomorrow and talk and rail and cite more noise about it. And it will be covered. And we are in this loop, Nicolle, that we seemingly as a country can't get ourselves out of. For the last 7-8 years, we've talked about one person and one person only incessantly in our politics, and that's Trump. And we're looking at moments like this, and we're saying we're not outraged by it, we're not turned off by it, we're not disgusted by it. We're actually intrigued, and we're curious. And it literally is like watching a reality TV series, and this is the next episode. And so, yeah, from both a party standpoint and a country standpoint, we're at a very, I think, seminal moment where we have to do some real hardcore soul searching and reevaluating of what our priorities are, because this shouldn't be it.
Yeah, look, you've made this very meta, right, from the outset. So let's stay here. I too share your queasiness with what we are watching, but I would posit this: for 8 years he's been in charge, and today he's not. We're not taking a motorcade because Trump announced a rally in Manhattan. We're taking a motorcade because Trump has to appear in court tomorrow to be arraigned, because someone finally has the to say, you know what, if he committed this crime, he should, perhaps if a jury decides he's guilty of it, be held accountable the way all the rest of us are. This is different in some ways, Michael Steele, is it not?
It is, and I get that. I really do. But if there wasn't all this obsession beforehand, I mean, go back 3 weeks. What were we doing 3 weeks ago today? We were having a conversation about Trump being arrested on Tuesday when we knew damn well it wasn't happening. You know how we didn't know it was happening, Nicolle? Because the DA didn't tell us it was happening on Tuesday. We listened to Trump and we go down that rabbit hole with him. And I do appreciate the point you just made about why this motorcade is different from one going to a rally. But in one sense, it really isn't. It is part of a continuation of fascination and infestation, in my view, of our politics with the curiosity of the show, and not the just sheer like affront of what it is we're looking at. And I'm so glad you stirred this up, and I'm dying to get Harry and Claire and Basil in. But we're going to have this conversation right now because it has a bearing on everything we do through Election Day in 2024. So let's get this right. Let's get this right between us, and let's get this right as a show. I think that the gaslighting about how much money he's raised is one of the lines that, like, if he raised $80 million or $2, I don't care. And the notion that the indictment has somehow bumped him to the top of the heap, he was already at the top of the heap. You got DeSantis gasping for air because Disney just kicked him in the knee. I mean, the notion that the indictment has done something good for him politically is pure gaslighting from his camp. And that's sort of where I draw some wonder that we're still falling for that. I agree with that. I think you're absolutely right. 5 million and counting so far. Certainly what's going to happen tomorrow night is already being previewed for us, right? It's already kind of being set in motion to get us anticipating, salivating for what he's going to say after spending a day getting processed. There's no other criminal. He's a criminal defendant, people. He is no different from the brother standing on that corner that his motorcade is about to pass, and should be accorded the same way, in my view. Because I know if they came and knocked down my thing and got me and drugged me out of here, y'all wouldn't have cameras at my front door. Y'all just wait till someone put out a press release. Yeah, he got processed. But this is what I'm talking about. What frustrates a lot of Americans is this bifurcation that we claim we don't have in our system as we augment it and show it anyway as something that is real. And I think we just need to be careful, because the next 18 months is going to be this. It's going to be this. And I think we need to understand that from the outset and just be smart and prepared about it. Cover it, but cover it smartly.
I like that we've started here. I feel like the chairman has elevated our discourse and added a layer of responsibility that we should have. Again, I would argue that this is not a MAGA rally. He's heading to court to be arraigned and fingerprinted, and we may or may not see that as a country, but this is important.
Well, Michael gave a word. He certainly did that. And first and foremost, I want to just give a shout out to law enforcement here, to the Secret Service agents and the NYPD and the mayor who has briefed the city and said, look, if you don't start nothing, won't be nothing. So just let's keep it quiet. And
biggest moment of the mayor's career today, I thought.
In many ways. In many ways. And look, on the other side of this, we speak a lot about the militarization of our police departments, and we're talking about criminal justice reform. But the reality is that New York City Police Department is prepared for this. And at a moment's notice, they can get called up and be able to act decisively if there is any trouble. Having said that, I think Michael's absolutely right. You know, he talked about a reality show, and what's interesting is when you look at reality shows, in some way you say, "Oh my God, I'm glad I'm not them." Oh my God, that's who they are. That's not me. But the reality is that there are a lot of Americans that see themselves in Donald Trump. And that's why, and I understand everything Michael's saying. For me, everything that we have and will discuss, like the amount of money we raised, it's about $7 million. Those things are data points for me. They're data points because they show a trend in who America is and how that America is going to treat me and the people that I care about. And I'm very, very focused on that, because if the mayor has to come on TV with his police commissioner and address the supporters of Donald Trump, whether they gave him money or not, that means that my life and the life of the people that I care about are in danger. For me, this is actually the most dangerous time, because Trump can be performative here, whether he is gagged at the end of the day or not. He will find a way to communicate to his supporters what to do and what not to do. And if he feels threatened, and we already know that he's gone after the judge, he's gone after the district attorney, if he feels threatened, he might communicate to any and all of his supporters what to do next. And that is what scares me tremendously.
No, me too. I want you to say more, but I would just say stand back and stand by. It took months to percolate and simmer, and it was, berries that turned to jam, right? It was in the pod, changing form, they heard it, they made T-shirts, they processed it, they watched events, and then they acted on it on January 6th.
And I agree, but with everything that was said, we should not be normalizing that. It's not normal that a former president of the United States gets arrested and will be arraigned. That is not normal. But again, I go back to the earlier point. It is important to know what the fallout is going to be, because it will affect me and mine.
It affects all of us. This is Garrett Hake. Are you watching this? Or did you want to say something, Michael?
Yeah, just real quick.
Go.
I was at an event, real quick, just to your earlier point. I was at an event a while back where a former president was there. This was not what was greeted us when we came to that event. Yeah. And that's my point.
I take your point.
All of this was not how a former president of the United States arrives at a location. They don't block off blocks. There are no motorcades. There's none of that. They are private citizens who happen to be a former president and are accorded the protection that they well deserve. But this is what I'm talking about. Donald Trump, there's no difference between Donald Trump walking in that building and Joe Biden right now. And that's the problem as I see it.
I completely agree. Claire, let me bring you in on it. We saw the back of his head. We know his hair in his head is of great concern to him. He once refused to attend a ceremony, at a military ceremony in Europe, to honor the troops because his hair would get messed up. So you got to imagine he spent a long time on what his hair would look like for that walk we just saw. Claire McCaskill, jump in on all of this.
Well, first of all, let me just say that I believe that your show has some of the best producers in the business, and I get there's going to be a debate over how much coverage we give this guy under these circumstances. I will say this. I think the most interesting split screen might be, what impact did J6 have on what's happening today and tomorrow? The split screen might be the tens upon thousands of people that gathered when he said it's going to be wild, and the massive amounts of people who turned out, and the relatively sparse crowds that lined his route to Trump Tower today. And tomorrow we'll see. We'll see if we've had a lot of lessons from January 6th that we're seeing right now. We're seeing preparation by the police. We're seeing active listening and monitoring and communication among those folks who watch things online to see if there's any credible threats. But maybe the most important thing we're going to see is deterrence. Are people deterred from coming out and being violent against law enforcement because of what happened in January 6th? Has the Trump base learned their lesson about resorting to overthrowing our government or trying to overthrow police officers just to show how loyal they are to Donald Trump? If today is any indication, there has been huge deterrence, either that or this guy's really lost his steam, because I guarantee you he's depressed right now, because in his pea brain, he thought he was going to see thousands and thousands of people lining the route, cheering him on. And in reality, there ain't much there. Maybe, 50, 75 people on the side of the road. Not a big crowd. I think that's an interesting split screen. Maybe more interesting, with all due respect to the wonderful producers you have, than the split screen with arm mugs and the highway.
Well, our producers are brilliant. They are the best in the business, and so I'll underscore that point. And they have availed to us someone who's got sort of situational awareness, and that is my colleague, NBC's Garrett Haake, who's outside the courthouse, not where Trump is. Trump is, for those of you who aren't familiar with New York City, Trump lives basically uptown on Fifth Avenue, near where all the fancy shops are that you see in lots of rom-coms. The courthouse is way downtown. Garrett, give us what you understand to be the preparations. Pick up on Claire's point about deterrence being one of the aims of law enforcement today in New York City.
Yeah, Nicolle, about 4 miles south of Trump Tower here at the courthouse, we have seen over the last 2 weeks, the time I've spent on this street corner watching this courthouse and DA's office for signs of an impending indictment, the security footprint grows substantially. More barricades going up, more uniformed officers from the NYPD and from the New York Courts Department that protect this area being sort of more present and more visibly present. And to Senator McCaskill's point, I was here 2 weeks ago at the first planned protest outside this courthouse, where only a few dozen people showed up to protest on the former president's behalf. And so you've seen this very robust posture from the NYPD, a deterrence posture, to be sure, to say we are here, we are prepared, and we'll see what happens if you decide to show up and test that. Now, we know that late last week, representatives from the Secret Service were here, from other law enforcement agencies, kind of scoping out the courthouse here, trying to figure out what's the best way to bring the former president in with the minimal amount of exposure, both for security purposes and publicity purposes. We are unlikely to see much of more than perhaps even just the shot we saw a second ago of him stepping out waving. We might see less than that tomorrow when he arrives here. Just the streets are narrow and tight. This would be the location for protests, and the Secret Service does not want to screw around with that. They want to get in and out with a minimum amount of disruption, something that the mayor underscored at his news conference today. And again, to the points about, kind of deterrence and January 6th and other protests, Mayor Adams and some of the other officials who spoke at that same press conference today went to great pains to say they've seen no indication of specific threats, no indications of large numbers of people coming here. It's the kind of sort of smaller scale protest, First Amendment action that New York City handles on a daily, if not hourly basis.
And I mean, New York City is, as Basil alluded to, Garrett, well trained in creating this space where an individual's First Amendment right to speech and the right to assembly are honored. But they also have unbelievable intelligence gathering. I think it's a police department where its intelligence capacity is studied the world over. And from that perspective, do you have any readout about what kind of people maybe in New York today and tomorrow who aren't normally here?
Well, I can only report the lack of information on that, Nicolle, both from New York City's perspective and from the reporting that we've been able to do at NBC. There's no indication of the kind of outside groups that sort of flocked to Washington, D.C. in the lead up to January 6th, making similar trips to Manhattan. Eric Adams made that point in his news conference today. I can tell you that, the intelligence department that you speak of at the NYPD stood up after 9/11. Is the gold standard for how this is done domestically. And if they picked up on something, they were not warning about it publicly, nor can I tell you of any significant reporting that my colleagues or I have done at NBC that suggests anything more than political tourism here, perhaps in the form of Marjorie Taylor Greene and some other Republican congresspeople who want to come and show their own personal loyalty to the former president. But in terms of the kind of massive disruptive outside groups that, get law enforcement agencies worried about protests turning into violence, I've heard nothing.
It's really a fascinating point, and we'll see if this is a conversation you and I come back to if we're on the air together tomorrow. Garrett, just jump in on the larger point. I don't know if you heard some of Michael Steele's admonitions right at the top of the hour about how we covered Trump. But what are you're the best that we have, and you were on this story. What do you think about that?
I try to stay away from meta media criticism as a way of protecting my day job.
Michael Steele started it.
Well, here's the point I'll make to what he had to say. With Donald Trump, unlike any other candidate I've ever covered, it is impossible to separate the personal, legal challenges and the political opportunism, right? I mean, you can't say we're only going to cover Donald Trump, the political candidate, and not cover the way he tries to take advantage of his own legal challenges, or to say this is a legal story or this is a political story. It's impossible. His campaign spent the entire flight pumping out emails to try to juice their fundraising, and then midway through the flight announced what their fundraising totals were on a flight that was stacked with campaign officials going to an arraignment, which is very much not a campaign event in the traditional sense. So like everyone else, watching a motorcade that looks reminiscent of O.J. Simpson is not what you expect to see from political coverage. But this is not a candidate who has ever ascribed to normal political rules. And so as strange as it is that the Venn diagram between the Trump campaign and the Trump legal apparatus and sort of problem-solving lawyers and what have you, that Venn diagram is a circle. You cannot separate these things, and we have to cover them together.
I think it might be shaped differently. I think of it as like a messy pile of branches or something, not a neat circle. But I really appreciate your analysis, and thank you for jumping in on that bigger conversation. Let me add to this specific conversation my colleague, also the best in the business, Dasha Burns. She's live outside of Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan, where Trump just did, I don't know, like an Evita-like wave to I don't know who. How many people were there? What did he see when he pulled up? And what happens now?
Well, look, Nicolle, to those viewers that do not live in New York City, let me just set the scene here. This is Midtown Manhattan. We're on the corner of 57th and 5th Avenue, and this is an area where a lot of tourists gather. Normally, folks here are headed to the Lego store or doing some window shopping, but today, a lot of the people making their way through here have been coming by and stopping and asking us, where is the former president? What is the latest? What is going on? And so as they heard that he was getting closer, the crowds here grew. Just about everyone in this area has had their cell phones out, documenting every moment for the last half hour or so, realizing that this is, as we use the word perhaps too much, but right now it is warranted, an unprecedented time in history. So right now there is a pretty big crowd that is gathered just across the street from Trump Tower. We're sort of catty corner to the building. Right now, a massive crowd that was gathered there as he was entering the building. Some police helicopters up above. Throughout the day, there's been a heavy police presence, barricades all around here. Actually kind of tough to move in and out of this area throughout the day today. And of course, a massive media presence here as well. In terms of protests, though, it's been pretty quiet today. Just a lot of curiosity, Nicolle. Not a lot of action in terms of pro or anti-protesters. A couple folks with flags gathered, but not anything to worry about. Tomorrow is the day when all eyes will really be on the city, and Mayor Eric Adams earlier today gave a briefing where he talked about how the city is preparing, that there is no credible threat right now, but he did issue a warning to what he called any rabble-rousers coming to the city to air any grievances. He told folks to behave themselves in no uncertain terms, saying he expects peaceful protests, but of course the NYPD is ready for anything. These are crazy times, Nicolle.
They're crazy times for us as a city. They're unprecedented times for us as a country. But I want to bring Harry Litman in because as a legal process, this happens, as a couple of folks have already said, Basil and Michael, this happens every day. And I want to go through the normal part of the story. What will happen to Trump that happens to everybody who has been charged with 30 felony counts?
Yeah, he'll show up. He'll be in a sort of interview room as opposed to a holding cell. He'll come in. We probably won't see it. They're going to try to keep it as buttoned down, notwithstanding MSNBC's motion. He'll hear the charges. And I think by the way, the indictment has to come out from under seal a little bit before 2:15, so he can absorb them and he can say he understands them to Justice Merchant. And how does he plead? Not guilty. And boom, that's it. And we have much more will ensue, but not with his presence. I mean, hearing everything of the last 15 minutes, Nicolle, the words that really struck me as a former prosecutor is lack of ultimate control. There is the feel here of a reality show, but he's not the guy at the end of the day. It might be a very long day, but he's not the guy who gets to say you're fired. In fact, he may be the guy who gets voted off the island, depending on what the New York jury does. So all of this pageantry or political Sturm und Drang has a very different backdrop of a serious process that at the end of the day is really going to decide his fate, not the vote, not voters, and not the sort of, attack politics. What lies behind this is a sober process that he does not control.
It is a good way, I think, to buy a little bit of patience from Michael Steele for our coverage today, but also to look at these live events differently, because we're going to have to grapple with this again tomorrow. I'll come on the air tomorrow and we'll have images of Donald Trump coming in and out of a courtroom, and I hope you'll all be back to help us sift through them responsibly. But I guess the other question I have for you, Harry, is through a legal lens, or not even a legal lens, through the lens of the judge in this case. How will his conduct be viewed differently than it is to any of us trying to analyze it politically?
Two ways. The Justice Merchant, who presided over the previous trial of the Trump Organization, has to worry about, first, the polluting of the jury pool with all this histrionics, and second, the safety of court personnel. Bragg already received a death threat. So even though the things he's doing might not rise to the level of a crime given the First Amendment, he will have the power to impose a gag order. That's something that everyone's looking to tomorrow. Will he do it or will he wait? In a very tailored way, because, we have the unprecedented situation where someone's running for president. But if he tailors it narrowly and says, look, don't name people by name, don't talk about the case, what has to, at the end of the day, be invoked is a short stay in jail, because he'll impose the gag order if Trump continues to violate. A warning, another warning, another warning. But at the end of the day, he'll have to say, if Trump continues to be obstreperous, Mr. Trump, next time this happens, I'm going to put you in jail. And having said that, he has no way out. I think it'll be a very long string, but it's just that's the kind of lack of ultimate control, another kind that I had in mind. Yeah, well,
Harry, I think his lawyer, Joe Tacopina, has the same concern. I'm not going to play this, but let me read what he said yesterday. This is Joe Tacopina, quote, "We're not doing anything at the arraignment because that will be showmanship and nothing more." It sounds like warning received, that they are aware that any antics tomorrow could really jeopardize Trump, the defendant.
Warning received by Joe Tacopina. Warning received by Donald Trump. Who
TBD.
knows? And of course,
That's fair.
He may love this moment. We don't really know, but I got to imagine jail. You talk about his hair. Just think about that. And in the pokey, that's a bridge too far. I think that has to be something he is really afraid of. And again, the judge has the power in a very tailored way to keep him from threatening people and from polluting the jury pool.
Claire, I think I cut you off.
No, first of all, I don't know how you pollute this jury pool. Harry's right that this is what would normally happen, but this will be the most difficult jury selection in the history of a criminal trial in this country. The jury selection is called voir dire, and that process is going to be very, very tricky because there is no one who hasn't heard of this man or this case. In fact, people are asking, why aren't they taking his DNA? Well, the reason they're not taking his DNA and the reason they may not do a mugshot is that process is a process to help identify someone if they commit another crime. in this instance, the government has Donald Trump's DNA, and it's not like he needs a mugshot. Everybody knows who he is, what he looks like. Maybe the most history-making thing tomorrow, Nicolle, is that for the first time in his life, Donald Trump does not want a camera. I'm not sure that's ever happened before. So he likes the idea of being a victim. He likes the idea of fundraising off this. He likes the idea of, enabling his supporters to see him as being persecuted by a government out of control. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure he's excited about them seeing him stand in front of a judge and being accountable to a judge. As Harry just indicated, I mean, he doesn't have complete control. I'm not sure that he would ever go to jail for contempt, but I'm also pretty sure that his lawyers are every day trying to convince him to zip it at least long enough to get this proceeding underway, and in a way that the judge does not start out with limits on his ability to speak.
Yeah, Michael Steele, I want to bring you in on this, and I guess I would you have shaped and framed my thoughts for the entire 2 hours today, but I do think there is this allergy to being out of control. I mean, the only reason he doesn't want a camera in there is because he wouldn't control the shot. He wouldn't control, the questioning. He would have to be responding to the judge. You understand the charges against you. And I wonder if that diminishment is something that isn't even lost on Donald J. Trump.
No, it's not. I think he's very much aware of that, which is why from 3 weeks ago, he wanted to set in motion at least some level of the terms in which he wants to engage in this process. He wants to have some narratives in place that buffers him, that makes him feel that people will come and fight for him and do the things for him, rally. It doesn't really matter that there's 75 people on the corner. The fact that there's 75 people in the corner, okay, cool. But he knows in the broader network of people who support, and I'll use that term, love him and will do for him, that his sway is even stronger and growing. And that's all that matters for a guy like Trump. It's not about, it's not, he knows this isn't a rally where he needs 25,000 people in a stand to prove a point. He's already proved the point. It proved it 3 weeks ago when he said that he was going to be arrested, not the DA, and everybody went down the rabbit hole with him. And that's where he wants us to be, where that's the space he controls, because he knows what corner he's going to go around next. We don't. And we just kind of follow. And like all good rabbit holes, they go deeper and deeper and turn. And so, tomorrow is, he probably doesn't want the cameras in there for a lot of reasons. But beyond that, he's already making his point, and he's already got our attention. And we're already going to tell the narrative, at least to some degree, the way he wants it told. And that matters more to Donald Trump, whether there's 75 people in a corner or there are cameras in a court.
Basil.
I just want to, if the last few minutes, the theme is some level of Donald Trump's humility, I just want to add this point that the much maligned Alvin Bragg is at the center of all this, right? That for all of 2016 and throughout his presidency, Donald Trump maligned judges, he maligned prosecutors, he maligned generals, if you remember. And what's amazing about
FBI directors, defense secretaries, secretaries of state,
everyone he could
senators.
Name. But Alvin Bragg is the third district attorney in the last 48 years in that seat. He is the sixth in the last 80 years. And by the diversity of the man and his ideology, people are going to feel very threatened by that. So you've already seen, Donald Trump go after him. Republicans have certainly gone after him. But I just want folks to remember that at the end of the day, all that Donald Trump said and did, it is this black man that brought him back to New York to face accountability. And I think that's just amazing, fitting justice, no matter what happens at the end of the day.
At a time of Alvin Bragg's choosing,
That's
not
exactly
Donald
right.
Trump.
That's exactly right.
I want to come back to the legal part of this story with you, Harry Litman. I mean, again, I'm not going to play it because we've had to watch live pictures of Donald Trump, but just take my word for it. John Bolton and Bill Barr were on TV making different points about basically how awful it would be if Trump were acquitted. That was John Bolton's central point. And Bill Barr was talking about what a hideous witness Trump would be in his own defense because he can't stop lying. I am paraphrasing both men. I am not quoting either of them, but those were their points. It is such a, talk about rabbit holes. I'm right down there at the bottom of Mueller mania, when everyone said he can't sit down with Mueller, he'd lie and get himself charged with perjury. I mean, everyone knows who he is. The people who saw him up close as our country's commander-in-chief know how pathologically dishonest he is, and how politically craven he is. I mean, I suppose that's John Bolton's point. Does any of that have a legal significance? Are we now in a phase where the legal process simply follows the facts and follows the course of the law?
You bet. And that's how I've been thinking of it, though, again, it'll be a long time. But I like both Barr and Bolton's point because they're focused on just this process. So think about it. It really is the case. The worst client in the world who's collected, 3,000 lies. What a bloodbath a cross-examination would be. He cannot take the stand. If you think about that in terms of the trial that's upcoming, that means a lot of constraints in how he tries to get evidence forward and how things look, et cetera. So again, if you filter it, this is an exceptional period because everything about the case is going to be braided with, total political Sturm und Drang and a great stress test. But the jury will one day sit, and if you think about how both sides come forward with what they have to say, that's what really matters. There'll be silence until then, and it's a long day, at least public silence by the DA while motions go back and forth and the like. But it's a very significant point, is Barr's, that when push comes to shove, this guy can't testify, and it really matters for some of the braggadocio he's showing. That's not going to come out in court. He's totally constrained. So it just seems to me he's making an enormous bet because everything he does makes his trial legal prospects worse. But he somehow thinks if he can just get by and I guess be elected president, it would be a game changer, and it would. But that's a big bet.
Yeah, I mean, and that was his bet all along. I mean, that's why he fought to stay. It's why he staged January 6th. It's why he wanted the military to seize the voting machines. It was all about shielding himself from legal exposure. And a lot of the books written after his presidency bear that out. All right, I need all of you to stay with us. This can't stop anytime soon. When we come back, the ex-president has made history by being the first president to be criminally indicted. He may make history again by being indicted more than once. We'll talk about that with former January 6th Select Committee member, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, next. And later in the program, while we still don't know these charges coming out of the Manhattan DA's office, we are getting a better, clearer picture about what crimes prosecutors are looking at in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents investigation. There was some incredible new reporting in the Washington Post that we'll tell you about later in the show. Don't go anywhere.
Hey everyone, it's Tremaine Lee, MSNBC correspondent and host of the podcast Into America. A train derailment and chemical spill in East Palestine, Ohio, caused panic and anger among residents and triggered a big response from the EPA. But for people who live in so-called sacrifice zones, especially in Black communities, environmental issues like this are a way of life.
So when you live in a sacrifice zone, you're basically being poisoned every day. So it becomes an intergenerational cycle of poison and poor public health.
Listen now and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
As all of us watching today's coverage know, and as we gird ourselves for the days and weeks to come, it's worth remembering that the wheels of justice grind very slowly, and this is likely the beginning of the beginning in what is sure to be a long process in efforts to hold the twice impeached, disgraced, now indicted criminally ex-president accountable. Knowing we're only at the start of this, there also comes the realization that there's still a lot we don't know, including the possibility of the ex-president also becoming the first president ever to face multiple indictments. It's possible. As we await the results of investigations into the classified documents he squirreled away at his Mar-a-Lago home and his attempts to overturn the 2020 election result because he lost, as well as potential interference in the Fulton County, Georgia election result. But with all the unknowns, there are things about Trump we do know. Things that for years he's done and will continue to do despite the legal woes he faces. One of them is something that our next guest once coined the big grift. After news of his indictment broke, the former president's campaign claims they raised millions of dollars. In the first 24 hours from his supporters, they're now saying that number is up to $7 million. Joining us, Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. She served as an impeachment manager during Trump's first impeachment trial and, of course, has made regular appearances on this program to keep us abreast of the work of the January 6th Select Committee. I thought of your public presentation in the January 6th Select Committee's public hearings and the big grift because it's happening again, based on Garrett Hake's reporting from aboard the skies between Palm Beach and Manhattan. Is there any recourse for raising money from someone's political supporters to pay your personal legal bills?
Well, there are FEC issues. There are some rules that you can raise funds in a political campaign and legally use them to defend yourself. I don't know what representations he's made in his emails to his followers, nor whether he has taken the steps necessary to legitimize the expenditure on legal fees. But, the ex-president takes any opportunity to raise money from his core supporters, and he's doing that again.
Well, raising money from his core supporters and cozying up to images of violence at the people who threaten him is a story that the Select Committee investigated and told in its public hearings and its final report. When you see him reposting and disseminating images of a baseball bat and Alvin Bragg's face and raising however much he's raised from his supporters at a time when he faces criminal exposure because of money he illegally accounted for in silencing allegedly a porn star, where do your thoughts go?
Well, I'm very concerned about his rhetoric, which is actually even more over the top than in the days and weeks and months preceding January 6th. Whether or not his core supporters will respond with the same kind of mob violence that we saw on January 6th, I certainly hope not. And from the press reports, it looks like the social media does not indicate the kind of mob violence that was planned and executed on January 6th. However, we all know that there are unhinged people in our country who do respond to requests to engage in violence. You don't have to have every person who's a supporter of a political candidate to respond. It's just those people who are on the edge who might be feeling that the president is asking them to take a bat to the district attorney's head. I just think it would be much preferable for our country not to incite violence, to treat this as the way it should be treated. Charges will be unveiled tomorrow. The ex-president is entitled to due process, a presumption of innocence unless convicted, and we'll see this play out. I think it's important for all of us to stand up and support our government, our system of government, the Constitution. And unfortunately, once again, it doesn't look like the ex-president is in that spot.
I mean, Alvin Bragg is a particularly intense focus for Trump and his supporters because he's gone first. We've had a lot of conversations about where DOJ was. I guess if we're being fair, Merrick Garland wasn't there until March after the insurrection. But from March until the appointment of Jack Smith, it is clear from the outside that the events and acts that you and your committee investigated were not under close scrutiny by the Justice Department. I want to show you something Cy Vance said about why he didn't bring charges in the hush money case.
Why didn't you charge the hush money case? Why didn't you ever charge it in 2018, 2019, 2020?
Well, Chuck, I don't want to get into the deliberations that might be covered by grand jury material, but as I believe you know, I was asked by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District to stand down on our investigation. As someone who respects that office a great deal and believing that they may have perhaps the best laws to investigate, I did so. But I think the question is not so much why didn't I do it or we did it, but why this district attorney is doing it. And that really requires us to be patient and to wait. Yeah. This process isn't going to be accelerated by us talking about it. It's going to be moved by the court at the pace the court sees fit, and I guarantee you the court will want this to move quickly.
Have you ever heard of the Southern District of New York or any federal U.S. Attorney's Office telling a local prosecutor to, quote, stand down on something they didn't bring?
Well, I was very alarmed by the testimony or the interview that you just played. You know, I've been involved in cases, for example, when I chaired the House Ethics Committee, where we would be investigating a member of Congress, and the Department of Justice would ask us to back off because they were bringing an action, and we always did because we didn't want to ruin their investigation and potential criminal indictment. I've never been a U.S. attorney or in their office, so I don't know what the pattern is, but certainly if the DOJ has a clear path forward and asks a prosecutor to stand pat while they pursue it, that would not be a surprise. But what is a surprise is that they didn't actually pursue that. And then the question is, was it done basically to protect the president? Was it ever their intent to bring this case? And did they interfere with the district attorney's office just to protect the president? That's what came to my mind when I saw that. It was a concern.
Yeah, I mean, in the time frame he gives us is 17 and 18. Obviously, Donald Trump was president. Bill Barr was the attorney general. But that office found that Donald Trump coordinated and directed the hush money scheme to two women, Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, and then told Cy Vance in that 2-year period to stand down. Would you like to know whether or not Merrick Garland looked at the evidence when he became attorney general and that office was no longer under the thumb of Bill Barr?
Well, if he hasn't yet, I imagine the interview yesterday will cause some people to take a look. It's interesting that the department took the position based on an Office of Legal Counsel paper that a sitting president couldn't be indicted, and yet asked the local prosecutor to withhold on their investigation. So I don't know any more than what's been put in the public arena, but this doesn't smell so good. And I think somebody ought to look into it.
From your lips, Congresswoman, from your lips. It doesn't smell good. And I think if we believe that sunlight is the greatest disinfectant, I think it's the best thing we've got going based on the work of your committee. I think there are a lot of questions at a minimum. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, always great to talk to you, especially on a monumental day of news like today. Thank you for spending time with us. We have to sneak in another quick break. We will all be right back. We're back with Harry, Michael, Claire, and Basil. In some ways, what the Congresswoman just said, something doesn't smell right, just begs the question, will the truth emerge about everything that Trump did to shield himself from criminal exposure as president?
Well, there's some interesting reporting recently that Alvin Bragg actually took a case that was moribund and started from the very beginning and in painstaking detail tried to reconstruct everything. If that really is the case, it suggests that that even though there was concern around what ultimate evidence was there, that Alvin Bragg did this in a very careful and deliberative manner. Having said that, the Quinnipiac poll last week said that 93% of Republicans think this is politically motivated. 72% independents think that it is as well. That should be a little concerning for Democrats because those independents were very helpful in 2022. Having said that, Democrats should be careful not to overplay their hand. Just let Alvin Bragg do what he has been doing and be careful and methodical about how this is playing out. Even if it doesn't end in him in an orange jumpsuit, it's important to note that he is being held accountable in this regard. Alvin Bragg got him from Florida, brought him back to New York.
Right, not on his own free will. I mean, the schedule was not done by him. Michael Steele, I want to come back to where you started. And let me just ask you this. I think that we've seen the tip of the iceberg in terms of what went on to shield Trump from exposure. I mean, what the Congresswoman said, and she chooses his words very carefully, something smells in the SDNY disposition of the incidents for which Donald Trump will be arraigned on 30 felony counts tomorrow. Do you believe that we will get to the bottom of why he's never been held accountable before?
I hope so. I hope that there is not just accountability for Donald Trump, but accountability within the system itself that looks back on the decisions that were made and the choices that came out of those decisions around how to move forward on the evidence that was in front of them. And I think the Congresswoman is right to hear the former DA say the words he said really raises the questions about, well, what exactly were you asked to stand down for and why, and what was the circumstances? So there's more to this narrative, as there are with everything dealing with Trump. There's another rabbit hole out there waiting for us. But I'm hoping that the leadership inside DOJ and the DA's office are prepared to fully explain to us, particularly if this goes a certain way, if a conviction is gotten in this case, what happened? What's the difference between then and now?
Yeah, Claire, I've talked about Trump as sort of political gangrene. The body is sick. It can't regenerate. It can't heal himself. I wonder if the Barr era DOJ doesn't represent some legal gangrene.
Well, quickly, let me just say there is nothing unusual about a U.S. attorney's office asking a state office to stand down while they are investigating a crime where there's concurrent jurisdiction. Happens every day. In this instance, they asked him to stand down when they were investigating Michael Cohen, and they indicted Michael Cohen in SDNY. They did not indict individual number one because he was a sitting president. So the real stink here comes from when Trump left the presidency, and there was a decision. By the way, that was under Jeff Sessions, not Bill Barr. Jeff Sessions was Attorney General until November of 2018, and Cohen pled guilty in August of 2018. So then the stink arises when DOJ under Joe Biden decides to let it go. That's the problem.
You can't leave us like that, Claire. You have to come back tomorrow and elaborate. I mean, I think those are the questions for sure that the Congresswoman alluded to and that you put a much sharper and accurate point on. Thank you for that. Harry, Michael, Claire, Basil, thank you for being part of our coverage for the last hour. We have another hour to go. Coming up for us, we're going to tell you about brand new blockbuster reporting on the evidence that has been amassed in the classified documents investigation being conducted by special counsel Jack Smith, that Donald Trump looked through the documents himself. That is in there. We'll bring you that story after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, I'm Jen Psaki. I know from the years I've spent on campaign buses, in foreign capitals, and in the Oval Office that there is always more to a story under the surface. On my new show on MSNBC, we're going to bring you inside all of it, breaking down the truth about the things that matter and visiting with some of the most fascinating people in the news today. So I hope you join me every Sunday at noon Eastern on MSNBC for Inside with Jen Psaki.
I think the document case is the most serious case. I don't think they went after those documents to get Trump. I think they actually wanted the documents back. And what's at issue in that case is not the taking of the documents, it's what he did after the government sought them and subpoenaed them and whether there was any obstruction. And I think that's the most serious one out there.
To get his job as Attorney General, Bill Barr wrote a 19-page memo basically arguing that obstruction isn't a thing. But here he is, sounding like someone who has had a change of heart. Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York on the eve of the twice impeached, disgraced, and now indicted ex-president appearing in court tomorrow in Manhattan for his arraignment. The spotlight is shining thanks to some great new reporting in the Washington Post on another area of extreme potential criminal exposure for Donald Trump. And that's the investigation into his mishandling of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago property and the steps he took to obstruct the investigation into that act. You just heard it from his handpicked former AG, Bill Barr. The documents probe is the one that he thinks is the most serious, the one that poses the biggest legal threat to Donald Trump. What Barr is getting at is that it's not just about Trump taking the documents to his residence. The issue is that after first the archives and then the FBI tried to get all the documents back, those little state secrets, they issued a subpoena, and there were still things that Trump wouldn't return. It's regarding that focus, the obstruction that he engaged in, that special counsel Jack Smith has amassed a seemingly huge and fresh body of evidence, according to some incredible new reporting in the Washington Post. From that story, quote, in the classified documents case, federal investigators have gathered new and significant evidence that after the subpoena was delivered, Trump looked through the contents of some of the boxes of documents in his home, apparently out of a desire to keep certain things in his possession. The people familiar with the investigation said. Investigators now suspect, based on witness statements, security camera footage, and other documentary evidence, that boxes including classified material were moved from a Mar-a-Lago storage area after the subpoena was served, and that Trump personally examined at least some of those boxes, according to these people. While Trump's team returned some documents with classified markings in response to the subpoena, a later FBI search found more than 100 additional classified items that had not been turned over. The Washington Post details how this behavior was happening even earlier. Quote, investigators have also amassed evidence indicating that Trump told others to mislead government officials in early 2022 before the subpoena, when the National Archives and Records Administration was working with the Justice Department to try to recover a wide range of papers, many of them not classified, from Trump's time as president, according to people familiar with the investigation. While such alleged conduct may not constitute a crime, it could serve as evidence of the former president's intent. Intent is key to proving obstruction. So as the Post reports, quote, in the Trump case, prosecutors and federal agents are trying to gather any evidence pointing to the motivation for Trump's actions. Brand new evidence looking at Trump's potential obstruction of justice in the Mar-a-Lago documents investigation is where we begin the hour with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. Washington Post national investigative reporter and MSNBC contributor Carol Lennick is here. Also joining us, former acting Solicitor General, now law professor at Georgetown University, MSNBC legal analyst Neil Katyal is here, and former FBI counterintelligence agent Pete Strzok is back. Carol, it's an unbelievable story. I read it on my phone, and then I had to see it in bigger letters, and so I read it on my computer, and I get the Washington Post delivered to my house, and then I read it in the paper. Take me through the reporting, and it's really the first and most comprehensive look at the evidence in the obstruction prong of the Mar-a-Lago documents case. It's the first time that Jack Smith's Mar-a-Lago's case has this parallel, this historical parallel to the Mueller probe, which existed along the obstruction probe and the coordination with Russia prong.
You know, Nicolle, what I really loved about your opening was that you highlighted what I think is the most important paragraph in that blockbuster story by my colleagues here at the Washington Post. That paragraph is the new juiciest bit, which is that after receiving a subpoena in a criminal investigation from the federal Justice Department to turn over all classified records, which were not his possession, Donald Trump, according to witnesses, testimony, texts, and email evidence, according to that information, Jack Smith has learned, he decided to claw back some of those documents, have them brought to his residence at Mar-a-Lago, review them, and hold, presumably, or I should say, according to the testimony, is believed to have then clawed through them and kept some that he believed he wanted to keep. What's important about that? It means he knew. He personally knew and played a role in holding back records after receiving a subpoena. He then, as we already have reported at the Washington Post, and to be fair, as investigators at the Department of Justice already learned before Jack Smith got this case, he had told his attorneys, here's where you should be here's where you should, search for these records. And his lawyer attested that I looked through all the records, all the places that I was told to look, and I concluded that there are no more classified records at Mar-a-Lago. That turned out to be false. As you know, as I know, as my Washington Post colleagues know, as everybody on this panel, very seasoned watchers of this case know, there were 100 more classified records and then some at Mar-a-Lago after Donald Trump and his attorneys asserted that they had returned everything. And that is a huge problem for Donald Trump. Now, Jack Smith has another big problem for Donald Trump, which is evidence suggesting that he personally went through these records and tried to hold some of them back himself.
One of the pieces, Neil Katyal, that was always sort of a flashing yellow, and again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a cop, but I, talk to you guys every day and I'm rewatching The Wire, is that there was tape, right? There's the security footage. It's in the affidavit that DOJ took the extraordinary step of releasing after the court-approved Mar-a-Lago search. And there were witnesses like Walt Nauta and other personal aides who would have been the kinds of people, not Mr. Corcoran, or I think it's Christina Bob that Carol's reporting suggests attested to, we looked everywhere, we didn't have anything, even though she carefully parsed it and said it's been represented to me that there isn't anything. But let me read this about the work of people who might have been involved in moving things and who were definitely more personal aides to Trump. The Washington Post reported in October that Trump's valet, Walt Nauta, had told investigators that he moved boxes at Mar-a-Lago at the former president's instruction after the subpoena was issued. Smith's team has video surveillance footage corroborating that account. The Post reported and considers the evidence significant. In addition, the people familiar with the investigation said authorities have another category of evidence that they consider particularly helpful as they reconstruct events from last spring. Emails and texts of Molly Michael, an assistant to the former president who followed him from the White House to Florida before she eventually left that job last year. Michael's written communications have provided investigators with a detailed understanding of the day-to-day activity at Mar-a-Lago at critical moments, these people said. When you take the footage and you take the testimony of people like Walt Nauta and Molly Michael, you have a really granular understanding of what any principal has done.
Exactly, Nicole. So first, a big picture point, and then to your question. The big picture point is that the news reports that Carol's referring to and that you started this hour with, they're a great reminder that the other investigations into Donald Trump haven't stopped just because we've all been focusing on the Manhattan District Attorney one over the last couple of weeks. I mean, Donald Trump's legal concerns extend far beyond New York. And I've always felt that this set of Mar-a-Lago charges is one that he will ultimately face, that this is really, really serious. And, I agree. I'm kind of almost rethinking myself, but I do agree with Bill Barr here on this point, that this is not just about the stolen security documents. It's about the obstruction after the fact. And Carol rightly points out that key paragraph in the Washington Post story about Trump's actions after receiving the subpoena. Now, you asked about the Walt Nuda stories and everything else, and in conjunction with the new reporting, it's really painting a certain picture that really destroys, it looks like, Trump's defense. His defense is to use the defense in The Wire, or the mafia uses, hey, I'm the henchman, my hands are clean, other people did this stuff without my knowledge. And that's where both the reporting from October and the reporting yesterday comes in to say, Trump, it looks like you were the obstructor in chief. Your hands were dirty throughout, and you don't have the ability to say, I didn't know about this, I lack the criminal intent and the like. It looks like you were the person doing all this. That puts him squarely in the crosshairs of a criminal offense and indictment, and it makes it very different than former Vice President Pence or President Biden. Neither of them is accused in any way, shape, or form, to my knowledge, of acting in this ringleader obstruction way that Trump is.
Neil, the obstruction evidence has been thrust into public view in part from the affidavit itself. This is what DOJ filed in August 30th. Quote, through further investigation, the FBI uncovered multiple sources of evidence indicating that the response to the May 11th grand jury subpoena was incomplete and that classified documents remained at the premises, notwithstanding the sworn certification made to the government on June 3rd. In particular, the government developed evidence that a search limited to the storage room would not have uncovered all the classified documents at the premises. The government also developed evidence that government records were likely concealed and removed from the storage room, and that efforts were likely taken to obstruct the government's investigation. Why hasn't the obstruction case been charged yet?
So if I'm Donald Trump's lawyer, Nicolle, and heaven knows what I did in a past life to line myself up there, but if I were, I would take what you said and say, look, that's fine. That might show an obstruction charge against someone. But where's the evidence linking that to Donald Trump? Nothing in what you just said deals with Trump specifically. He could say, that was my subordinates acting of their own volition. That's where the reporting from yesterday comes in. That's so important. It ties Trump directly to the scheme if it holds up. And of course, we don't know and Trump is entitled to the presumption of innocence and all of that. But if that's what Jack Smith is looking at and looks like what he got, that's going to be very devastating. And one other point about this operates in law enforcement like a prisoner's dilemma. It might be that either this Walt Nuda person or any of the particular agents guarding him or the lawyers, any of them might want to be loyal to Trump on their own, and he might induce them with any number of things to be loyal. But law enforcement's going to go to them and say, look, we got other people we're talking to, and whoever tells the truth first is going to be rewarded, and those who lie, false statements charges under Section 1001, and so you're facing jail time. And so that's a very powerful engine to get at the truth. And so, even if Trump has been able to succeed on the basis of loyalty in the past, I don't think that's going to necessarily work here.
Yeah, and I guess, Pete, this is probably a cringy part for people like you, an elite FBI counterintelligence agent hearing me put it this simply, but it seems that news accounts have suggested that the FBI had some concerns or suspicions that at least, I remember Walt Nauta being the subject of some reporting that he hadn't been completely forthcoming or honest. We know that judges have found that lawyers have had to come in and testify about this episode because they may know about illegality or crimes committed by Trump. I mean, how encircled do you think Trump is at this point as the person in charge of the conspiracy to obstruct the documents probe?
Well, Nicolle, I think quite encircled. I mean, in answer in part to your earlier question, I think part of the reason he hasn't been charged yet, remember, one of Trump's key lawyers, Evan Corcoran, was engaged in this long fight about whether or not he'd be compelled to testify before the grand jury. And only recently did he go ahead and do that. And, as part of, I agree, with Carol, that you identified the absolute key element of that story that's very new. But there are also some other little nuggets that point to Trump within there. Some of it is this information that he was shopping around for answers between attorneys. That when some attorneys apparently may have told him, look, you may not keep this, you must return it, that he had sought other different advice from different attorneys trying to tell him that he could. So you don't get to that information until you overcome these hurdles to testimony. And then, the other thing I'd point to, although it's not an element of the crime, the other second thing that really stood out at me from this this article is it points to motive. It points to why Trump did this in the beginning. There was some speculation a while back that, some in the FBI, unnamed sources allegedly, who thought, he just wants mementos. But this article very clearly points out that Special Counsel Smith's folks are asking whether or not he showed this information to donors. So if you're thinking, if you're trying to figure out the why, what's your theory of the case? Why on earth did he want to do it? If he's using this to convert it for fundraising and showing it to people who absolutely have no business seeing it, and he's hiding it at the same time, that really starts to flesh out this story about, one, why this occurred, and two, how integral Trump was to this entire enterprise.
Yeah, let me read that part of the story back to you, Carol. As investigators piece together what happened in May and June of last year, they've been asking witnesses if Trump showed classified documents, including maps to political donors. People familiar with those conversations said such alleged conduct could demonstrate Trump's habits when it came to classified documents and what may have motivated him to want to keep the papers. The Post has previously reported that Trump told aides he did not want to return documents and other items from his presidency, which by law are supposed to remain in government custody because he believed they belonged to him. An absolutely harrowing prospect when you think back to all the reporting you and your colleagues have done about what was found there. I mean, incredibly sensitive nuclear information, other countries, very closely held state secrets. I mean, and of course we can all picture it, right? I mean, here was someone for whom nothing was sacred, not an approaching hurricane who Trump, edited for a live shot. But to Pete's point about this connecting motive with something that is plausible to any of us who covered him, and the fact that Jack Smith has it, just connect those dots for us.
Well, I think Pete couldn't be more right about the importance of securing this information and how little Donald Trump cared about our nation's security based on his strange belief that he is due to keep government records, that he is allowed to have this information because it's, quote unquote, it's mine. That's just not true. And also, I would add one other detail there, which is, remember, Donald Trump, as we reported in the Washington Post some months ago, Donald Trump wanted to tweet a picture of an Iranian missile. He wanted to sort of brag about his access to this information. It was as if, he got some sort of prestige and reputational value from some bragging rights, really, to be able to have this. You may remember, Nicolle, we wrote about an instance at Mar-a-Lago out on his beautiful veranda where he was entertaining a head of state and talking about all manner of incredibly sensitive national security matters, essentially at a cocktail party. This is a veranda that's public, full of his guests, some of whom could be eavesdropping, and he is having this conversation in open air in Palm Beach. This lack of respect is an issue. But when we get to the issue of crime, what's the crime? The other day, Donald Trump, in an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News, said these things are his property, and he has every right to go through these boxes to keep this information. And he referenced the fact that the government paid Nixon $18 million for some of these records. It sort of, defies reason how he's thinking about, again, government and presidential records, things that are governed by federal law, and that he was told in a subpoena in the spring of 2022, he had to return. I want to reference one more important piece of information that can't be underscored enough. And that is when viewers wonder about how big a deal some of these records were, seasoned national security investigators who were tasked with reviewing these records after the raid at Mar-a-Lago, after FBI agents reluctantly were instructed that they had to go down there, search for any more classified records. After that moment, these investigators are going through the records and realize they lack the clearance to look at them. That's how serious some of this material was. It was under special access programs that only a cabinet level official can authorize individuals one by one to review.
So, Neil, it brings us back to where we started and your quirk of saying that you agree with Bill Barr. Bill Barr knows what classification is. He was the country's attorney general. He saw the most secret classified documents that our country creates. And yet he thinks the obstruction crimes are more glaring. He thinks on obstruction, which and before he became AG, one of his auditions was a 19-page memo he wrote basically saying that Mueller's obstruction case was BS. We know that's one of his favorite words. And you've got this obstruction skeptic going on Fox News of all places saying on obstruction, Trump's goose is cooked. How bad must it be?
Incredibly bad. So there's two pieces to the Mar-a-Lago charge. One is just the stealing of all these documents, what Carol's been referring to. And I think Carol's absolutely right. My first job before I was in the Solicitor General's office at the Justice Department was National Security Advisor. And the idea that anyone could take even one of these documents, let alone over 100, is unfathomable, unthinkable, and a clear and present threat to our national security, because these documents can be reverse engineered and you can figure out what spies did to produce them. Literally, lives could be lost. So that's the first half. And then the second half is the obstruction charge, which Bill Barr has been focusing on to his credit. And that's because it is such a slam dunk. And, Nicolle, it's been reported that the Secret Service has just been asked to testify in this Mar-a-Lago investigation by Jack Smith. And, that to me is a very, very interesting development, because the Secret Service generally resists testimony. Carol knows this better than anyone. And they, I was at the presentation back in 1999 when they came in to present, why they shouldn't have to testify in the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky investigation. But here it does seem like they were witness to a bunch of stuff, and by a former president, not a current president. And that, again, is going to ratchet up the pressure on Donald Trump. And I hope he has a decent lawyer who can tell him exactly what's going on so that he doesn't live in his fantasy land of being a 3-year-old and saying everything is mine because I was president.
Pete Strzok, quick last question. Do you think Bill Barr has testified in the documents investigation? He is an incredibly... it is noteworthy how enthusiastic he is about an obstruction prosecution for Trump.
Short answer, no. I mean, he has not mentioned it. I haven't seen reporting anywhere that he has. He clearly was Attorney General during the last days. I mean, he left a couple of weeks before the inauguration. But I think in terms of, the things that were being counseled to the president in terms of what your obligations are with regard to the Presidential Records Act and turning over documents, what your obligations are in terms of the handling of classified information or returning information like that. That seems something that's much more kind of in line with the role of a chief of staff or personal assistant, the Walt Nautas and the Molly Michaels and the Mark Meadows of the world, not necessarily Bill Barr. Wouldn't put it past him, but again, if he had, I think we would have heard about it.
I think if you're Jack Smith and you close your eyes and you throw a dart at everyone that ever walked into Trump's West Wing, you could find a high-level official who could testify to Donald Trump's mishandling of classified documents. Just a hunch, and I'm sure he doesn't need a dartboard. Carol Leonnig, thank you for joining us to talk about your colleague's incredible news story and how much more we understand about that investigation. Neil Katyal, thank you for helping us make sense of it. Pete Strzok sticks around. When we come back, officials are determined to avoid anything resembling a repeat of any aspect of January 6th. When Donald Trump is arraigned tomorrow, we'll talk about the preparations by law enforcement for what could potentially become a volatile situation here in New York City. And later in the program, a Delaware judge deals a big blow, a big one, to Fox News in the $1.6 billion defamation case brought by Dominion Voting Machines. That case is now headed to trial in just 2 weeks. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Hey everyone, I'm Tom Llamas from Top Story on NBC News Now. Every night, Top Story is your news playlist. We take you to the front lines of the story, where it's actually happening, with NBC News journalists on the ground from all over the world. We cover what you need to know and bring your newsfeed to life. And now, Top Story is available as a podcast, so you can listen anytime and anywhere. Subscribe now for new episodes every weeknight.
While there may be some rabble-rousers thinking about coming to our city tomorrow, our message is clear and simple. Control yourselves. New York City is our home, not a playground for your misplaced anger.
That was New York City Mayor Eric Adams with a stern warning for anyone hoping to or looking to or planning to protest in and around the arraignment of the disgraced ex-president. For days now, law enforcement has been on high alert ahead of this unprecedented event. 35,000 police officers have been mobilized. Federal, state, and local security agencies are all working in coordination. The New York Times reports this about the law enforcement response, quote, even as Trump's coming arraignment reflects a different set of circumstances, the response is informed by lessons learned from the Capitol riot and from the challenges posed by the nationwide protests against police violence in 2020. They include the need to deploy forces quickly when threats pop up on social media and the importance of sharing intelligence among agencies in real time. Officials said, however, there are few, if any, signs that the overt coordination of mass protests that characterized the weeks and months before January 6 have taken place. Joining our conversation, New York Times reporter Glenn Thrush, whose byline is on that bit of reporting we just read from. Pete Strzok is still around. Glenn, take me through what you and your colleagues are reporting. It is, on one level, reassuring that nothing is planned or feared. At another, it's this depressing touchstone now, this new frame, because of January 6th, we're always prepared for a spontaneous, violent event.
Can I just say, exhibit admiration for Adams's formulation of, what was it, playground for misplaced anger? As a New York City resident.
Me too. Yeah.
I thought that reflects my entire childhood, but that's another story. No,
for another day.
I think what we're dealing with, Nicolle, I think, is a situation which has a great many stark similarities to what occurred prior to January 6th and a great many differences. And I think the first is really venue. New York City is a vastly different place than Washington is. And the role that the NYPD plays in New York with 35,000 officers, a force that is substantially larger than some small countries' armies, is just all the difference in the world. I mean, as one former NYPD official said to me, they can deploy, they could push a button, get 1,000 officers. They could push another button, get another 1,000 officers, and keep on doing that for a long period of time. And when you throw in a lot of the other bureaucracies, law enforcement agencies in New York City, that the state offers, the state police, the court officers, you just have a lot more capacity to deploy than you did in New York, and it's under a relatively unified command. So that's one of the big differences. The other major factor is what has occurred since January 6th. There is an acute consciousness of the lack of coordination. The FBI did not alert the Capitol Police to certain threats. There was a great deal of disorganization within the Capitol Police. I think they've studied the negative examples of that experience and attempted, because we don't know what's going to happen, to ameliorate that. But the one thing I would say is it just takes one or two malevolent actors to overturn the entire apple cart. So there's, on one sense, there's a sense of confidence that they're not seeing the same sort of signals of mass threat. On the other side, there is that sense of apprehension about smaller groups being able to pull off something.
Yeah, and that was where I was heading with this, Glenn. I mean, it seems like they can be relatively confident that, the QAnon shaman isn't going to poop inside the courthouse, right? Those are the kinds of events that it doesn't sound like they're hearing chatter are likely to happen inside the courthouse. But the political violence that has ensued, the man who sought to take hostage and who brutally attacked Paul Pelosi, the shooter in New Mexico, and the shooter at the FBI field office days or weeks after the court-approved search of Trump's Mar-a-Lago property. I mean, how do you, those are more, and NYPD has experience with this too, post 9/11, but these needle in the haystack threats, how do they protect for a longer, sustained period of time against those?
Look, that's been a problem. That's a problem in a city. That's the flip side of the city with the scale of New York. I covered the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. I was there in the city, and there was that sense that anything could happen at any given time. And you're absolutely right to discuss the case in Cincinnati. It really looms very large, particularly with the FBI, but also within the NYPD. There's a sense that the atmosphere around this is a great deal more like the situation that was in the immediate aftermath of the search of Mar-a-Lago, then January 6th. In the January 6th, what people sort of forget about January 6th is it wasn't covert at all. You had two substantial demonstrations prior to the big one, and everyone sort of knew something was going to happen. They just didn't know that particular outburst of violence was going to happen.
Right. And Pete, they knew because Trump had invited them on his Twitter feed weeks and weeks in advance, like a save the date. Can you address my second question, though? How does the country's law enforcement, New York City and beyond, protect against the animosity, the hatred, and the rage? Let me just put one more piece of information out there for our viewers. This is from the Department of Homeland Security's threat assessment issued in November. Quote, perceptions of government overreach continue to drive individuals to attempt to commit violence targeting government officials and law enforcement officers. Some domestic violent extremists have expressed grievances based on perceptions that the government is overstepping its constitutional authorities or failing to perform its duties. I haven't read all of Trump's fundraising appeals, but I'm sure they are very much in line with that existing grievance.
No, Nicolle, I think that's absolutely right. And look, I agree with Glenn that New York City is excellent in terms of being able to, when there's a specific event, to be able to provide a robust, deep sort of protective shield around any potential illegal activity, let alone violent activity. I think where the problem comes in is, when you look at the post-Mar-a-Lago search, as was pointed out, it was an FBI field office in the Midwest that was attacked. This is not something nobody attacked the FBI field office in Miami or the FBI field office in Tampa. And much like New York City can do an extraordinary job locking down and securing the courthouse and the district attorney's office, that isn't going to stop somebody in Omaha, Nebraska, or up in New Hampshire or El Paso, Texas, who decides that there's a horrible, just miscarriage of justice by the federal government, particularly when you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan saying we should defund the FBI. So how do you predict somebody who probably may not have all their sanity to begin with, suddenly deciding that they've had enough with no link whatsoever to Trump, to New York City, to Mar-a-Lago, suddenly deciding that they need to lash out at the government? That's a really difficult thing to do. And unfortunately, I think we are going to see incidents of violence because I see nothing from the Republican Party leadership doing anything to tamp down this sort of aggrievement with local, state, and national law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, you both touched on such bigger and deeper issues, Glenn, with your reporting, and Pete, with your sort of widening the net to what we have to protect against. I'd love to have you both back if we get through, when we get through tomorrow, and have that conversation. Glenn Thrush and Pete Strzok, thank you very much for being here today. After the break, for us, a stunning ruling by a judge that it is, quote, crystal clear that Fox News aired false claims about Dominion's voting machines and the 2020 election. We'll tell you why that ruling matters next.
Hi, I'm Jen Psaki. I know from the years I've spent on campaign buses, in foreign capitals, and in the Oval Office that there is always more to a story under the surface. On my new show on MSNBC, we're going to bring you inside all of it, breaking down the truth about the things that matter and visiting with some of the most fascinating people in the news today. So I hope you join me every Sunday at noon Eastern on MSNBC for Inside with Jen Psaki.
Mark your calendar, if that's your thing. It's my thing. April 17th, 2 weeks from today, that is when the monster, groundbreaking $1.6 billion defamation suit against Fox News is expected to go to trial following a decision on Friday by the judge in that case. In what the New York Times describes as a, quote, major setback for Fox, the judge ruled that Dominion's case was, quote, strong enough to conclude that Fox hosts and guests had repeatedly made false claims about Dominion machines and their supposed role in a fictitious plot to steal the election from President Donald Trump. Or, as the judge put it, quote, the evidence developed in the civil proceeding demonstrates that it is, all caps, crystal clear that none of the statements relating to Dominion about the 2020 election are true. We should point out that the judge, in his ruling, as we said, wrote the word crystal in bold and all caps. The judge then went on to seemingly call Fox's bluff over First Amendment protections in this case. As the New York Times reports, the judge, quote, rejected much of the heart of Fox's defense, that the First Amendment protected the statements made on its air, alleging that the election had somehow been stolen. Quote, Fox has argued that it was merely reporting on allegations of vote fraud as inherently newsworthy, and that any statements its hosts made about supposed fraud were covered under the Constitution as opinion. It's an argument that this judge was not buying. This is from the judge's ruling, quote, Fox News Network hosts repeatedly framed the issue as one of truth-seeking and purported to ground interview questions in judicial proceedings and evidence, and did not read the statements as mere opinion. Furthermore, it appears oxymoronic to call the statements, quote, opinions, while also asserting that the statements are newsworthy allegations and or substantially accurate reports of official proceedings. Wow. Joining our coverage, law professor at George Washington University Law School and constitutional law expert Catherine Ross is back. Kim Atkins-Storr is also back, senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe, as well as an MSNBC political analyst. There's so much of this that I want to read to both of you and share with our viewers. But first, your reaction to the tone and substance of this latest ruling that has very much not gone in Fox's way, Catherine.
Thank you for inviting me back, Nicolle. It was a devastating ruling. It was very detailed. It went over virtually all of Fox's claims and arguments and rejected them. First, let me explain what a summary judgment motion means. It's a situation where one of the parties, and here there were cross motions, but the parties both said there are no material facts that need to go to trial. And the judge basically winnowed it down to 3 remaining claims that go to a jury, which we can get to later. But it was devastating because, as you noted, the judge said it was in all caps and bold. This was none of the statements relating to Dominion were true. He ruled that every statement, which he analyzed in detail in an appendix, was either a statement of fact or a mixed statement of fact and opinion, which had neither of which have any First Amendment protection. He rejected Fox's legal arguments that it had some sort of a privilege, and also that the question should be whether it was reporting as true that someone like Trump or a member of his team had made an allegation about a stolen election. And the judge said, no, this is not the question before the court. The question is whether the content of the allegations was true and you reported them. He also said, and this is a very important question in defamation cases, that this was per se defamation. In other words, Dominion doesn't have to show that it was damaged because the nature of the falsehoods is so inherently damaging. And that is, it goes to the heart of Dominion's business. And in one set of allegations, actually accused Dominion of committing a crime. So these are very major questions now off the table, all decided against Fox. And I said Fox had filed a competing summary judgment motion. That motion failed in its entirety.
So just to explain the point you started to make, that by siding with Dominion on some of these questions, the judge basically narrowed what will be determined in a trial to questions of whether Fox Corporation is liable. I understand that involves the Murdoch's role in all this. Importantly, we know from the discovery process that Rupert Murdoch said this: Trump insisting on the election being stolen and convincing 25% of Americans was a huge disservice to the country. Pretty much a crime. So that'll be central to answering one of the questions before the jury. The second is actual malice, and the third is damages. Just talk about how much of an advantage that is for Dominion to have everything else but those three big things settled.
It's a huge advantage because when a case is complicated and you have a jury of average citizens, the more questions they have before them, the more befuddled they might get. And the more opportunity there would be for Fox's lawyers to try to muddy the waters or pick away at smaller points. So the jury will be aware that the judge has already made these findings, that everything was false, that that Fox didn't even dispute that in the filings, that the damage is per se, which means that Dominion is entitled to at least some compensation to show that they were wronged without having to necessarily prove the actual damages. So the question about the Fox Corporation, I think, is less important. It's a question about whether they, quote unquote, actually published or whether it was just the network. And that is more technical, but the ultimate ownership, which interlocks, they're going to be responsible. So I'm less interested in that, at least as a matter of defamation law and making First Amendment principles about defamation clear. So the two really interesting questions are whether there was actual malice, which means with knowledge that the the statements were false, and if not knowledge, reckless disregard. And the court said that involves a state of mind. And therefore, it is not the kind of decision that the court should make. It is really a jury decision. And I think that and the amount of damages, whether actual, which Fox disputes, or punitive, which could be even much more significant. Those are going to be the two key questions. And on actual malice, the record is so full of admissions that the Fox executives and the people who were on air knew or had reason to know at a minimum that what they were saying, what the guests they were putting on were spewing falsehoods, that Biden had won the election, that there was no significant fraud, and they continued to make these false charges on the air, not only after they had more than enough reason to know they were false or likely false, but also after Dominion told them more than 3,000 times, you are spreading falsehoods, and they repeated. And that is one of the factors a jury can look at in deciding whether there was actual malice.
Kim, it's a stunning development that people, I think a couple months ago, cautioned those of us covering this case. These are very difficult. Even a strong case will have more of setbacks and wins. It seems that of late, and if you add the whistleblower who came out last week, all of the legal rulings have gone in Dominion's way. Anything can happen in a trial, but it certainly seems that everything we've seen to date has been in Dominion's favor, and really unbelievable legal setbacks, including reputational setbacks for Fox News.
Not even close.
Right. I'm sorry. Let me bring Kim in. I'm sorry, Catherine.
I think that's absolutely right, Nicolle. Look, I know as a former civil litigator, getting summary judgment motions in your favor pre-trial is really hard, because that is basically the judge saying, you know what, I am taking this out of the jury's hands just based on what we've seen so far. There's really no question for a jury to decide. Judges are very willing. They want to put this before a jury to do that fact finding. So the fact that this judge said, you know what, a reasonable jury cannot come to any other conclusion other than defamation happened per se, and Dominion was damaged in some way by it, is pretty extraordinary. And so now, as Catherine noted correctly, the jury just has to decide how much Dominion was damaged and whether there was this actual malice standard, whether Fox acted knowingly or with reckless disregard. And those two things are not just important in terms of the liability here. Those are the same factors at play when it comes to punitive damages. Dominion is already claiming that they suffered in excess of $1 billion worth of actual damages. Now, they will have to prove very specifically how they were damaged in order to get that compensatory award. But what I'm looking out here is that this seems to be setting Fox News up for a pretty hefty punitive damage award, which is also something that is unusual. But if it's based on these same standards, which it is, whether they knew what they were doing was false or whether they acted with reckless disregard, I think there's evidence of both. I think very well a jury can come to a conclusion that they acted so erroneously, so horrendously, that they need to be punished and not just compensate Dominion for the loss of their reputational damage, but also be made to punish with a very large award. I think that's one reason that the Fox network is fighting so hard and not just leaving this to Fox News, because they realize how big this award could be.
It is amazing. And if you watch their coverage, they cannot quit Donald Trump and his lies about the election. It's amazing. Catherine Ross, Kim Eckenstor, thank you so much for being part of our conversation. We'll stay on that story. A quick break for us. We'll be right back. This incredible protest erupted in Nashville, Tennessee today, and it was something. Hundreds of students walked out of school and marched through the streets of that city, demanding that action be taken to end gun violence. Just 1 week ago, that city, their home, became the latest site of a mass school shooting. 6 people, including 3 9-year-olds, died when a shooter opened fire at the Covenant School. The shooter's motivation is still unknown, but today's walkouts, which ended at the state capitol, were organized by the student-led anti-gun violence group March for Our Lives. We're going to keep an eye on them. Watch this space around here. Another break for us. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for letting us into your homes during these truly extraordinary times. We are grateful.
Hey, everybody, it's Hoda Kotb and Jenna Bush Hager. And we got big news, y'all. Our show is now a podcast.
That's right. You can take us anywhere you go, in your car, to the gym, even just at home on your own couch with a glass of wine.
We like spending time with each other, and now we love that we can spend even more time with you. Are you sick of us yet?
Don't be, because you can never have to miss a moment of fun, laughs, or friendship.
Yeah, subscribe. Listen to Today with Hoda and Jenna wherever you get your podcasts.